Welcome, everybody. Welcome to this training session brought to you by the Society of American Archivists, Archivists of Religious Collections section. My name is Joel Thorson, and I want to read this land acknowledgement that we have. We acknowledge that we live and work on the traditional lands of many Indigenous nations. We know that Indigenous people have suffered from historical and ongoing injustices and understand as an archival organization that we must work towards sharing historical truths and renew respectful relationships with Indigenous communities. We respect the long-standing relationships that Indigenous nations have to this land as the original caretakers. We are grateful for their stewardship and protection of the water and earth. We pay our respects to elders past and present. And our disclaimer, the content in these presentations is for information only and is not legal advice. Our views do not represent the organizations where we work. We do not make any endorsements or guarantees. We are not liable for any loss or damage caused by your use of the content we provide. It is your responsibility to critically evaluate the content provided in the presentation or any accompanying materials. And please mute your microphones and turn off your video. You can click on the closed captioning button, which should get you the transcript of the session. There will be question period after the presentation concludes, and you should use the chat feature rather than the Q&A feature to ask your questions. Please be respectful in your interactions, and we expect you to follow the SAA Code of Conduct. We're recording this session, and we also encourage you to join the Society of American Archivists if you are not a member. Now, our presentation today is Introduction to Deaccessioning. And before, let's see, our presenter is Nicole Menkesi, who received a BA in Geography from the University of Memphis, where she concentrated her studies on cartography and history. She completed her MLIS at Long Island University with the Advanced Certificate in Archives and Records Management. She is currently the Digitization and Archives Coordinator for the Long Island Library Resources Council, where she offers educational workshops, provides advice for the processing, housing, and display of special collections, oversees participation in the New York Heritage Digital Collections website for cultural institutions on Long Island, and executes the annual Long Island Archives Conference. Previously, she managed the collections of several other historical organizations in the area. So, Nicole, welcome.
Thank you, Joel. Appreciate that. I'm going to pin myself to the video, hopefully. And if not, that's okay too. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for your participation today. My name is Nicole Menkesi, and we're going to talk about deaccessioning and also some points about reappraisal. Today, these are our talking points. Obviously, deaccession criteria, creating a collections committee and deaccessioning policy, what to do with found in collection items, which is always a hot topic. What is considered a diligent search, documentation and transparency. And I have a few case studies as well that hopefully we will have some time to go through. I just want to mention quickly here, excuse me, just a second. There we go. I'm just going to move my little bobblehead out of the way. I'm also referring quite a bit to the guidelines for reappraisal and deaccessioning from the Society of American Archivists. You don't have to be a member of SAA. If you go to the SAA website and just go to the search box at the top and just type in deaccessioning, this is the first result that pops up. It's not a very large document, but it is pretty comprehensive, has a lot of really great resource information in there. And so I'll be touching upon their guidelines in addition to the slides that I prepared for today. One of the main points that SAA wants to get across is that reappraisal and deaccessioning is a part of collection management policy and should be a part of your yearly activities or biannual activities at your organization. And what this policy, or rather what this document does, is it also gives you some step-by-step processes that you can adapt to your organization. And it provides a lot of structure to what we're going to be talking about today. So what is deaccessioning? According to the Society of American Archivists, it's the process by which an archives, museum, or library permanently removes accessioned materials from its holdings. And we're going to talk about that accessioned part. And also the act of actually removing those resources from your intellectual and physical custody. Now, this is a really heavy slide of SAA's guiding principles. You can read through these yourself. The slides should be either available or we can get them to you. But I want to point out 3 major points. Reappraisal does not always lead to deaccessioning. So in the deaccessioning process, you have items in your collection that you're not sure why they're there. Once you kind of get into the process of trying to understand why it's there, finding your paperwork, sometimes new things come to light, and you may not understand why something was in your collection until you find the paperwork that justifies it being there. So sometimes you think that something doesn't belong, and then come to find out later that there is a good reason for it to be in your collection. Another point that I underlined is reappraisal and deaccessioning can be implemented across the full range of an institution's holdings or applied only to individual collections as the institution's circumstances warrant. What does that mean? It essentially means that this is something that should be an ongoing practice, that you should schedule this maybe every couple of years, or it could be something that is maybe more emergent because you are in the process of a move, or you have unfortunately suffered through a plumbing disaster and now items are getting shifted around. So sometimes there's a reason why you have to reappraise and deaccession, and then sometimes it's just a part of your natural course of work. And then the final point is these guidelines are applicable to the reappraisal and deaccessioning of series or portions of a collection. And that's an interesting point because you may have a large donation, but only a part of it should be a part of your collection based on your policies and your mission statement. So you may end up deciding to break apart a collection, deaccessioning some items and not others. So why deaccession? This is a part of the guidelines here from SAA. This is what they call the rationale. So to improve overall access to materials, to make split collections whole. That's a little tricky, and I'll let SAA explain that more in their guidelines. The 3 things that I have underlined here are the reasons that I have found in my professional work that seem to be the most common reasons. So to comply with current institutional collecting policies and retention schedules, to assess collection strengths and refine collecting focus, and to better balance research potential of collections with the necessary allocation of resources. So sometimes we don't have the space, the staff, the time, and we'll discuss all of these in later slides. Now, this is kind of my deaccession criteria, the points that I have found in my professional work. I guess I could say that these are the things that I find to be most common amongst other organizations that I work with. So the item no longer fits the mission of your organization. Maybe it never did. So for example, we collect for the Roslyn Historic District, not Long Island or New York State. The item no longer scope or is well outside the scope of the collection. Like how did we end up with a rowboat in our collection? Sometimes we're lucky enough that we have enough space for things that are really large items, but we still don't have any idea how they ended up in our collection, and they're taking up so much space, especially if it's furnishings. So sometimes things just don't match the criteria or the scope of what we're looking to collect, and it doesn't actually help us with the other parts of our work, in the sense that it's either taking up too much space, it's become a problem within the building itself. So that's a second point that I find often. The item is damaged or broken, and in my opinion, maybe unsuitable for display. This happens a lot. You'll find that folks will want to donate a chair that only has 3 legs, or other broken parts. And you wonder, should this actually even be in our collection? The item is deteriorating in a manner that affects other items. Most commonly, I think of red rot. So if you've got leather objects, maybe you have a saddle, maybe you have boots, maybe you have a belt that is falling apart. Most commonly, it's within books, rare books that are covered with a leather. And then it's because of deterioration, because of environmental conditions, red rot has come into play. So, this might not be something that you need to keep in your collection. You have to weigh these things out pretty carefully. In effect, it's a facsimile or reproduction. Boy, I have a thing about reproductions. Once upon a time, everybody needed a spinning wheel in their old historic home. But what a lot of folks didn't realize was that they were actually dealing with a reproduction. They weren't dealing with an original 18th century spinning wheel. So the question is, does that stay in your collection? Maybe it's something that you can transfer as a prop. We'll talk about that later as well. Sometimes you have to deaccession an item because you just have to admit that you can't properly care for that item. Maybe you're in a historic house and you have problems controlling temperature and relative humidity. Maybe, like I said with that rowboat earlier, you just don't have the space for the item anymore. So even though you could justify it being in your collection, it may be that you just honestly can't take care of it in the way that it should be cared for, at least responsibly. Maybe an item is missing. So you're on a shelf, you're looking through a shelf, you're doing an inventory, and you can't find something. Is it possibly stolen? Maybe. Is it lost? Probably. But it might be a reason to formally deaccession the item if you just can't find it. And then, as it was pointed out earlier in the earlier slide, part of a whole accession. So maybe you don't need the whole accession or the whole item and donation. Maybe just part of that donation makes sense and the other part does not. I want to make a quick note here about creating a collections committee. So if you don't have somebody or a group of people that you can, and usually it's a member, it's usually a couple of trustees. Ideally, it's somebody who's very familiar with either if you're collecting for a region or a town or something like that, a historical society, it's usually the town historian. It may be somebody who has a lot of institutional memory and history under their belt. So somebody who has significant understanding of the time, the place, the person that you are trying to collect for, and then a couple of trustees, and then yourself as either the archivist or collections manager. And creating a small group of people that can then decide what should be done with deaccessioned items, or rather reappraised items that deserve to be deaccessioned or disposed of in some way, kind of helps take the heat off of just one person. It's also pretty ethical to be able to say, listen, as a collective group, we have decided, taking into account our mission, what we're trying to collect, the space that we have, all of us combined as a collections committee have voted, and the majority has decided this and this and this and this. So it's best if it's an odd number of people, just for that voting reason. 3 or 5 is fine. I have a picture here. This is a larger committee that I've worked with before. But like I said, it should be made up of board members, historians, curators, archivists, or other professionals who understand the complexity of preserving items in your location. So having a small collections committee can really make this process, well, it's helpful to have other people to bounce ideas off of. So it helps make this process a little less daunting and a lot less where you feel like you're the only person and the weight of all of this is on one person's shoulders. I also want to talk about having a deaccession policy. So we're going to talk about the act of reappraising and deaccessioning, but there are policies that you can find online from organizations across the country. And I always recommend to folks to find an organization that is either like yourself in size or scope of collection. So if you're collecting for you're in a historic house that is preserving the legacy of a writer, find other homes that are doing the same thing and coordinate with them, sort of create a relationship with these places all across the country. And then see if you guys can maybe share some of your policy information. So there's examples out there. I say never, reinvent the wheel. Find a policy that seems similar to yours, work through the language, and make it appropriate for your space. I have a really nice example of a great collections management policy that has a deaccession policy in it. It's from the Greater Southwest Historical Museum. So thank you, Greater Southwest Historical Museum, for that. But like I said, there's a lot of great information and resources on the web for you to find a deaccession policy that you can add to your overall collections management policy. This is, since I'm in New York, I've got a couple of examples, a few slides that are dedicated to New York State itself, so bear with me. The New York State Archives offers this deaccession form, and it's a pretty standard form. You don't have to necessarily, it doesn't have to just be applied to New York State's archives. It can be applied to yours. So it's a nice form, gives you some spaces here to talk about your objects, what you're looking to deaccession. We will talk about how important documentation is. So as we go through the steps in a later slide, go back to thinking about this form and how you can use a form like this to help document your process. And I have to talk about found in collection items. So this is probably the biggest reason why we go and decide to do some deaccessioning work in our collections. Found in collection, which is basically an object that has no documentation. We've all been there. We found something on the shelf or in a drawer or what have you that has no number, has nothing to offer us. We have no idea how it got there. You can maybe scour your paperwork and try and find some kind of evidence if it's unique enough that it stands out. If it's just a stack of photographs, you may never be able to figure out where it came from. But especially when it comes to objects, the idea is that if it's found in collection, going back to that earlier definition, it needs to be a part of your collection in order for you to deaccession it. So first you have to gain intellectual control over that object. And every state is a little bit different. Let me just quickly check into, nope, I'm gonna wait for another slide. Every state is a little bit different. I have some later slides about what we do in New York State, but there's a process by which you can get physical control of objects that have no documentation in your collections. And once you have that ownership, then you can proceed with the deaccessioning. It seems a little backwards, like if I don't have any paperwork, why can't I just take this thing and pitch it or do whatever I need to do with it, sell it, what have you. But if we're trying to be as above board and transparent as possible, the right way to do this is to accession the item, and even in a very broad accession through the state, and then deaccession it. So it's a little more paperwork, it's a little more time consuming, but it's the right thing to do. I want you to also, if you have more questions about this, check out that foundincollections.com website. This is where I got this nifty little flow chart. Is the object, related to your mission? You can see here, yes, and then we have a whole number of choices to make. No goes directly to either inventory it and then reevaluate it, whether or not you're going to go ahead and keep it. Either way, you're still going to want to get intellectual control over your item. So this is pretty handy. It doesn't certainly answer all the questions that are out there. This is kind of delicate work because you have to really think about how it's perceived by the public. So this is a little bit of a helpful kind of flow chart, but it is by no means going to answer all of your questions, but it is something to kind of get you started. And it's a great way of showing it to other people, maybe on your board, how the process in general works. Okay, so it all begins with documentation. Begins and ends, I should say. Every step of this process should be documented. So if I'm not sure about why this coffee mug is in my collection, I'm going to take photographs of it or scans of it if it's a large photograph or maybe a poster or what have you. I'm going to dig through whatever notes or minutes from the collection committee meetings I have and add those notes to the collections committee meetings that are coming up. Or if you don't have a collections committee yet, you can at least, as I say here, write some kind of narrative and make sure that it's a part of your future, excuse me, your future reports to the board. I want to see if there's anything in here that I don't cover in a later. I think I basically get into all of these in more detail going forward. So I'm just for the sake of time, I'm going to go ahead and just go through this and talk about some of this other documentation. This is more documentation thanks to SAA's guidelines. This is an awful lot of text on this screen. I'm not going to read through it, but it's pretty comprehensive. It's all the little things that you don't think of, and they've thought of it for you. So, retaining correspondence regarding the deaccessioning and reappraisal and deaccessioning of objects. I wouldn't have necessarily thought to keep all my emails, but you're going to want to have all of this documentation because you want to be able to, if need to, explain it to the public, to the press, because we want to be as transparent as possible. Speaking of transparency, we want to keep the public's trust intact. So first things you want to try and do is if you're not sure about, actually, you know what? I want to go back just a little bit, if you don't mind. I want to talk about some more about this documentation. One of the things that you really have to do is go through all of your documentation. Perhaps you might find, if you can't find a deed of gift, you might be able to find some information in the archives of board minutes. You may be able to find some documentation in letters. I know that in organizations that I've worked for, many donations came in the 60s and the 70s, especially everything after the bicentennial in 1976, where historical societies got like a huge resurgence throughout the country and people were just donating left, right, and center. Often at those times, there weren't deeds of gift signed, nothing formal like we have and we know about today and we know better today. But things were written in letters. Maybe something was left on a doorstep with a note. So scour all of your files to see what you can maybe match up with previous documentation about objects or items that you have in your collection. And then we'll go forward now with this. And then you want to try and be as transparent with the public as far as what you're going to do with these items, what your plan is. Some of the transparency things that you should consider. If there is a donor and it's an object, you have a deed of gift, you know who the donor is, but you don't know if you need to keep it in your collection anymore. Let's just go back to that giant rowboat. Contact the living donors if you have whatever information you have, track them down if you can, if the original donor is no longer alive, and try and or at least let them know that you are going to be deaccessioning the item. You can also have a highly, and I mean highly publicized tag sale with the proceeds benefiting the collection. We'll get into that in a little bit. Uh, it's if you're going to do something like that, if you are deciding that the disposal is going to be through a tag sale of items that are either no longer wanted in the collection, or they were found in the collection and don't belong in the collection, or they were broken and donated and you have the paperwork, but now you're deaccessioning it out of the collection, and you want to have some kind of a sale, or you want to put things up for auction, get ahead of all that publicity, let people know what you're doing, put it on your website, put it in your social media posts, maybe let your local paper know. Just be as open about this as possible. The last thing you really want to do is have the public question whether or not you are treating your objects as you should be, because you are a person that as an archivist or a collections manager, you're holding the public's trust and you are representative of the organization. So everything needs to not just appear above board, be above board. I like to also put things in newsletters. I said social media announcements. If you're thinking about even doing a project like this, a reappraisal and deaccessioning, and that's your goal for the coming year, mention it in your annual meeting. Just say, this year we're going to do a total overhaul. We're going to inventory our collection. It's an attempt to get complete intellectual, physical control over all of our objects and our archives. There are many things that we have questions about. We're going to do our due diligence. We are going to seek out the original donors. Just be as open and honest with the public as possible. No one wants to see someone from the Historical Society at 8 o'clock at night with a trash bag behind their back and throwing things in the dumpster. It's a bad look. It's just bad ethics. And so we want to show the public that we are being careful with our objects and we are being responsible to the institution and to the collections as a whole. Disposal. So this is kind of a nasty word, but it's the one that we have to use. So what are different ways that we can dispose of objects once we know that we don't want, or they don't match our mission? Okay. Number one, you can return it to the donor if the donor wants it. This may also be something, if you do have that donation paperwork, that deed of gift, or something that would indicate who the donor is. You track that donor down or some of their heirs, and you say, we've looked at the paperwork, and it reads in the deed of gift, there should be a little section on your deed of gift. If we keep it, or even if we don't keep it, let's just say if that's in a temporary custody receipt, what are you allowing us as the donor to do with this object? And in some cases, it will be marked that they would like it back. So you have to respect that if that is the case, if that is on the paperwork that they want, or that's somehow stipulated in some documentation of the donation, then you are required to do your very best to return it to the donor or the heirs. Now, in some cases, and I'm using this as a little example here that I pulled up from a historical society that I worked at one point. We were doing this exact thing, going through a reappraisal and wondering, why we have certain things. I was also looking for items where we did want to keep the object, but we didn't have any paperwork. And I would find something like maybe a letter or a note in some board minutes from 25 years ago. So what I did was I sent a cover letter, and I sent a new deed of gift that basically express, well, this is the cover letter that basically expressed, and I'm just going to read this out. I was reviewing some of our session paperwork for the so-and-so Historical Society when I realized there had not been a formal deed of gift created and signed for your generous donation many years ago. On behalf of the board, the community, and visiting researchers, I'd like to thank you for your donation to our organization. And so I gave them a new, this is a cover letter, and a new deed of gift for them to sign. So it's kind of retroactively getting that deed of gift. So that's another, even though that wasn't a deaccession, that was kind of a part of our reappraisal. So don't feel like just because you don't have the paperwork that you can't get it in the future. But if you do decide to contact the donor and see if they want to keep or take back the item, that should really be your first course if it is so indicated on paperwork somewhere. It's always a good idea if you're in a small community like I was in this historical society, and you know that there are living heirs to whomever the original donor was, to reach out to them and let them know that you are in the process of deaccessioning this item, and give them the option to take it back. And then you can do the paperwork sort of almost like a reverse deed of gift, but giving the item back. Another way to dispose of items that you no longer feel suit your mission is a transfer. And this is probably, I find, the most gratifying way of moving objects out of my collection is to donate it to another institution where it seems like it's a better fit. You can also just transfer something as a prop. So remember how I had said earlier about that spinning wheel? Well, that spinning wheel was made in 1982. You can tell because there's nails and gizmos and gadgets on it that would not have been around when the original or when a spinning wheel was created, say in the 18th century. So you can transfer it out of your formal collection and move it into your prop collection. And that can be still a part of your interpreted room, your 18th century interpreted room, or whatever you'd like to have it for. But you can use it as a prop now. It's not technically a part of your actual accession collection. And then this isn't really something that happens too often, but it's worth mentioning that, you may need to return an item to its rightful private owner or a country of origin, assuming that you have pieces of art, or typically it's artwork or objects that are clearly not indigenous to your area. And then I mentioned earlier a sale. So it's not inappropriate for you to sell objects, especially those that you feel are in good condition and may be able to come, bring in a little bit of money. You can do that through an auction house. You can, again, say that you're having a fundraising tag sale, but you should definitely have all this paperwork and you're being completely transparent about what the sale is for and where the funds are going. Down here at the bottom, I have a quote from the International Council of Museums, and New York State's also made some changes in their guidelines as well. But essentially, in a nutshell, it says that whatever proceeds you get from the sale of an object that you have deaccessioned in your collection should go back into the collection itself. So maybe I sell this coffee mug for $100 at a local auction house. Well, that $100, I'm going to turn around, put it into a separate fund, not my operational fund, but it's best if you have some kind of a separate fund set aside for just these sorts of things. And then use that $100 towards, maybe I'll use it on archival boxes or tissue paper or other supplies, or I might use it for and other supplies, rather, I should finish that sentence, to preserve the existing collection that you have, or it may go into a family Bible that you saw on eBay or something else, maybe some letters, maybe it's a painting or a portrait of somebody that was the matriarch of the family from the house that you're preserving. So you can take the funds from a sale, or whether it's auction or your own sale, but it's very important that you take that fund or that money and put it in a fund and then use it back into the collection. So, and all of this needs to be transparent with the public. So I say get ahead of it and make it kind of a fun thing where, like, hey, we did some deaccessioning. We've talked to previous people. We either got control over this, usually saying things like intellectual control will go over people's heads and you have to put it in lay people's terms, but essentially just say that, these are items, they don't fit our mission. We want to, sell them so that we can go ahead and purchase this portrait of Mrs. Townsend and her family. And just letting the public, again, always be aware of how you're being perceived by the public. And then finally, in this point, this is a slide I knew we were going to spend some time on, is destruction. And it may be the only option. Retention schedules, that's usually more for records management. I'm kind of speaking from the Museum and Historical Society perspective, but university archives, they follow strict retention schedules, government archives, strict retention schedules. When it comes to things like historical societies and museums, the way that we can now scan documents like bills or records or tax filings or what have you, and just keep all of those basically on a hard drive. We don't necessarily need to keep the physical copies, but it's not that much trouble to actually have an electronic copy. So that destruction and retention schedules may or may not fall in line with what your needs are. So, but I had to mention it. More likely, the destruction will have to come because of things like contamination or infestation. So, and then this is something that I feel really strongly about: extremely poor physical condition. I've had folks show me a shawl that was in their collection and it was just torn and tattered, and it was a big mess. And they wanted to save it. They were like, maybe we could go to a conservator and get them to repair it. And it was heartbreaking for them, but I had to admit to them that it was just beyond repair. And it wasn't probably worth the thousands and thousands of dollars that it would surely cost, especially since this was an item that they weren't unsure of where it even came from in the first place. So in that case, it was definitely an item that I recommended for destruction. And then duplicate materials. Sometimes we have 5 or 6 sets of things. You can certainly toss away items. If you've got 5 or 6 of these items and they've been accessioned, then maybe you just keep 1 or 2, deaccession the other 3. I like to maybe move them, actually change them, instead of destroying them or throwing them away, and sort of transfer them as either props, or I like to try and find a way to donate these things for art projects. Or when I was working at the Historical Society and we were doing children's programs where we incorporated or we showcased archival objects and then had them sort of have some fun and replicate, like maybe making a paper mache vase or something like that. This is a great time to maybe use some of those old papers or some of these replicas and other items that you have more than enough of. So maybe get a little creative with that, and you don't have to necessarily just destroy something, but you can repurpose it. Your collection moving forward. So have a strong mission statement. I I've mentioned this in other programs. If you don't have a strong mission statement and a collections management policy, go ahead and do that first. Get a good inventory of your items before even thinking about deaccessioning. This is really kind of you've already got your ducks in a row, and now you can work on deaccessioning. This is not the beginning. This is definitely an end game kind of place on your timeline. It's not the beginning, it's definitely the end. So have a good, strong mission statement and a criteria for accessions. Stick to it. It's hard to say no to donors, especially when they're standing right in front of you holding an object in their hands. But you have to be firm and diplomatic, kind, and explain to them the reasons why you don't need that object. I've had people come to me and say, well, this is my grandmother's christening gown, but I've already had 30 christening gowns that I was contending with in my collection already. And I was able to convince the woman to maybe have it repaired, hang on to it. Surely out down the road, your grandchildren will want it. Even though she didn't seem convinced at the time, but she did come back to me years later and tell me that her kids did keep it. So once she had it conserved and put in a nice box, all of a sudden it had value to the grandchildren. So it's hard to say no, but you have to stick to your policies. There's another example that I have here is not accepting unidentified photographs. If you don't know who's in that photograph, if the person donating it has no idea and they're the best possible chance of knowing who is in those photographs, you may decide that you just can't keep taking these things in anymore. It does add up over time. You may say, hey, what's a packet of photographs here or there, but you're just making more work for the people that come after you. So have a good mission statement, have a clear scope of what you're willing to take in and what you're not willing to take in, and stick to it. And be gentle with people, because you never know what else they have. Sometimes folks think that you want their set of encyclopedias, and you don't. But then you come to find out that they have artwork or drawings from somebody who was an artist in your community that you're desperate to get your hands on, and they think, oh, we didn't think that you were collecting this. So I'm getting a tiny, tiny bit off topic, but having these kinds of policies available to the public, either on your website, which I think is probably the easiest thing to do, or even having like little brochures made up, donate for donations and future people that are interested in donating. Having that kind of out front and center allows people to know what to expect from you. And I always tell people that we don't take donations unless there's an appointment. I frame it in the terms of, we want to know your story. We want to know the history of your coffee mug and why it belongs in our repository, in our historical society, what have you. And then eventually over time, those orphan donations at the front door started to kind of not happen so much anymore. It was more and more infrequent. So have that strong mission statement, stick to it, and then that way going forward, you're not pressed to deaccession objects anymore. You're only bringing in the things that you want. And again, have that collections management policy available to the public. And the easiest thing to do is have it on the website. Another note that's, if you're not already doing this, you should be doing this, or it's my advice to do this. It saves you a lot of time, especially when you're getting all your information for an annual report to your state, which is include new accessions, acquisitions, and potential, well, obviously, if you're going to be doing some deaccessioning, you'll have kind of a separate document for that. But have these accessions and acquisitions in your monthly or bi-monthly trustee meeting minutes. So there's not only the records that you have that are on your in your software, in your collections management software, but that there's a formal record from the minutes of the board that will remain, that will remain from the organization going forward, no matter what happens. That you have this list of what it is that you've taken in. So there's and maybe even who the donor is, and possibly even a short description of what it is. So this is all good practices for, again, keeping you from having to do deaccessioning down the road. All right, so this is kind of the slide that we've all been waiting for. It's the steps that you need to take. And I've really pared it down here, but I think this is going to help. Again, this is deaccessioning for beginners. So this should help kind of put things in like a timeline sort of way of understanding it. So first, you're going to review your collections policy and any collections management policy, and always have your mission in the forefront of your mind. You're going to go through, you probably already know what you want to remove, but inventory items up for deaccession. Now, this doesn't mean you have to do a full inventory of your collection, although at some point you probably should. And you may just even do an inventory, and then as you're inventorying items, you may just put a little note or some kind of marking next to the list item so that you can go back and review that for deaccessioning. Or it may just be that today we're going to look at this shelving unit and what's on this shelving unit that we are questioning as being a part of our collection. So get together the items that maybe 5 or 6 or 10 or what have you. Then pull all your object paperwork. See if there's anybody if there was any kind of a deed of gift, if there's any kind of accession paperwork, if there's any kind of letters from the board, or any kind of notes in the board minutes, or letters, or sort of orphan notes, or what have you, that may give you some indication as who possesses legal title, if you're not sure that you do. If it is found in collection, which is you can't find anything, go through the steps to obtain ownership through your state's abandoned property law. Not really hard to find. Go to a search engine, type your state name, type in abandoned property law. Sometimes I add on things like museums, because it's typically museums that have these objects more often than not. Or museum just seems to be kind of that catch-all word that the states like to use. So find the abandoned property laws for your state and follow those to the letter. Of course, this is all, in keeping with having a collections committee meeting, or again, just it only has to be 3 or 4 people, but it's really good to have some people to bounce ideas off of, whether or not it really is in the best interest to keep it in your collection. Weighing out all of those factors that we talked about earlier, whether or not you've got the space, whether or not you've got the staff to take care of this large donation of items that maybe somebody is bringing in, whether or not it's something that you feel like you're comfortable maintaining, and knowing that you have giant swings in relative humidity in the summer and in the winter. So get a collections committee together if you can, even if it's just 3 people, and discuss through all of these different objects that you're looking to deaccession. Begin public relations. Get ahead of any kind of controversy or bad press that could be garnered from a deaccession process. And then really getting either the Board of Trustees approval or by vote through the collections committee, deaccession the item. Create the paperwork that basically just lets your trustees, it really just has to be documented with your trustees, and especially should be in the minutes, that this is the list of items that you are deaccessioning and why. Going back to that form I showed you from New York State, that again is having these kinds of forms for each item really explains your thought process, and it allows sort of due diligence with each item. And then document the sale or the transfer or the destruction of the item. If you have a label or some kind of identifier, you'll want to remove that. That's best practices. That's a whole other workshop we can talk about another time. And then keep all this paperwork together. I like to have and including printing off some of those maybe back and forth emails, and then keeping it all together, scanning it all together as a PDF, and then you have that as your digital file, and then also the physical paperwork. And this is paperwork that should be kept permanently along, like with minutes of your organization. These are a couple of case studies that I wanted to just incorporate because I thought that, you all might find it interesting. This is about how donors and the public can react negatively if you are not transparent, or it appears that you've been trying to hide your deaccessioning process. So I just wanted to share that. There's another case study here as well. And these are also some resources that I used, especially that guidelines for appraisal and deaccessioning by the Society of American Archivists really explains this very, very well. It also gives you a few forms here that you can look at and mimic with your own institution. And I want to just share with you really quickly what we do here at New York State. It's a bit of a process, but you have to first create a list and a small description of all the items. It doesn't have to be a lot. It could just be a coffee mug that portrays a scene, a winter scene, blah, 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 made, somewhere mass produced in the 20th century or 21st century even. And then have that list sent to there's a website on New York State at newyorkstatemuseums.org where you can post that list. Then you leave that list there for a number of weeks. You basically give your contact name, the address of your organization, and then about the year that you think maybe it came into the organization's possession. If you've been there for say 10 or 12 or 15 years, and you know that it's been there as long as all that, then you could put something to that effect into that form. And then, sorry, it goes on a little bit here. But essentially, if you don't receive contact from anybody who can provide documentation or any kind of evidence, if no response is received from your printed notice, then you can, I'm sorry, that would be after you post things in your local newspaper. You can post it to the New York State Comptroller's office. And then for there, it remains, I believe, is it 30 days? 30 days. And then after that 30 days, the items are yours. So it's a little bit of work. You do kind of have to, mark it on your calendar. It's been, and it is maybe a little bit of an expense, but that's what those notices are in the back of your local paper. So you can have something about, a notice of intent to acquire property, have that listed in your local paper for several weeks, put that on the New York State Comptroller's website, wait another 30 days, and then all of a sudden, now you have intellectual control. It's now yours. It's now yours to deaccession. So that's how we do it in New York State. I'd be curious to know more about how things are done in other states, but I would imagine it's something probably pretty similar, hopefully a little bit easier. I just want to thank everybody for attending. This is my information. If you'd like to reach me, you can Google, you can reach out, and I will try my best to answer some of your specific questions right now.
Well, thank you very much, Nicole. We have some questions. Could you talk a little bit about how this might work in a corporate archives, especially a religious corporation?
Yeah, I don't have a ton of experience with corporate archives, unfortunately, but and with a religious organization, I still feel like I don't know how corporate it really is. I would think that you don't really have much of a retention schedule. Um, with a religious archive, I would assume that there has to be, whether it's like a diocese or what have you, there should be some op authority that would have some kind of way of, I mean, is there anything like specific? Are we talking about like a relic? Because if it's something like a relic, I would think that it might be able to find some information about where it came from,
It could be,
with
but I think
minutes.
more archival collections or something where you might have a lot of found in collection items, but a lot of that might be internal transfers without much documentation.
Mm, yeah.
But yeah, you
That's
could clear
tough.
things with your leadership structure, I guess.
Yeah, I think, yeah. Here's the good news. You're not alone. Whatever struggles you're having, somebody else has had them as well. So I would keep kind of going up the ladder, asking other organizations what they have found. Reach out to those organizations that are as similar to yours. I'm sure you're already doing that. But if you aren't, try and find out what other people know about how they've been able to overcome these kinds of problems where something's found in collection with little to no documentation. So it is easier. I don't know how it, again, I wouldn't know how it would work in a religious organization structure, but I know there's a hierarchy with everything. So maybe reaching out to the higher ups and finding out, how you get, the blessing, if you will, to keep those items, whether in your collection or to figure out, where to transfer them.
I know
I'm
at my
sorry, I
old
can't be
place
any
of
more help.
employment, we had an internal transfer form, so we'd have some documentation of where things came from. So if you don't have that, that might need to be set up. Let's see, other questions. Do repositories, libraries, museums, historical societies maintain statistics of deaccession materials and objects that no longer fit the mission statement? If so, do these statistics reflect what actions were taken with regard to the materials?
Okay, so we wouldn't say call them necessarily statistics, but you would definitely need to have everything listed and documented. So it might be interesting if you want to think of it statistically, like, um, we got we removed, so and so many books. But the thing is, um, it's I don't know really how having those kind of like statistics, knowing like how much of any one thing or how often something occurred, um, other than to just, help another organization know that, listen, we do this like twice a year, or this happens, we make a priority to every 2 years go through, set aside 2 months where we go into the collection and reappraise and deaccession. But as far as listing everything that you've done, all of the information that you have, almost like creating a narrative within some of that paperwork that I showed you before, uh, so that people know kind of the whole story, what you did, how you did it, where things went, all of that you should have permanently anyway. So, um, as far as statistics go, I don't know. I don't know if anybody's really kind of keeping tabs with, they may know, but I don't know if those statistics can lead you anywhere. Other than to say to the public, like, listen, we removed 200 books from our collections because it was, we had multiple copies and things like that. So that might be of interest to the public, but I'm not sure if, but all of that documentation should be kept permanently.
And people are pointing out in the chat different links to different guidelines.
Oh, good.
Many religious denominations and organizations do have record of management guidelines and retention schedules. So those can be found in different church bodies, but it's, very similar material across denominations. The
Very good.
Archivist for Catholic Women Religious also has some guidelines. So, um,
I mean, listen, these organizations have been around a lot longer than most historical societies and museums have. So I would think that there's some good documentation. What it's just a matter of probably finding it. It might not be easily found, but it must exist somewhere. And I'm glad to see people sharing their policies.
someone asks, how do you document a donor's decision to remove a long-term deposit at your archives? Deposit meaning that they retain ownership and copyright.
Um, just get it in writing, even if it's just something that's an email, but something in writing. And if you can get them, if you have some kind of form that they can sign uh, and date, then even better. But just having something in writing and then keeping that in with the paperwork is should be sufficient, I think.
And let's see, finally, what about materials that are out of scope and there's no interest from other institutions and no use for them as props or
Well, if they're in good condition and it's like you don't know what to do with it, I mean, you could try and sell it. If it's something that you think you can sell. I mean, people sell all manner of things. So, if you just kind of got to get it out of there, and it's in good condition, then I would just go ahead and I would try to sell it and then take that money and use it for a good cause, like, either another item that you've had your eye on that is more fitting for your collection's mission or your organization's mission. Um, or, try it maybe again, we've done things where we've sold things in our gift shop and just kind of had a little tag that kind of told the story of what it was and why it needed to be in somebody's home and not in our collection. I don't know if that was helpful. I hope it was.
I know some places have book sales and other
Right,
things.
right. I don't know why I'm pixelated. I don't know what's going on, but it's probably just because we're about to get a nasty storm here.
Let's see, and
Any
some
other?
others report that
Okay.
they, answer to their internal church council or other organizational structure.
Hmm. Yeah.
Let's see. I think that covers most of the questions. So thank you very much.
Okay,
This
great. Thank you guys for
presentation will
having
be
me.
up. The presentation will be up on our YouTube site here shortly, within a couple of days. And thank you very much.
Okay, thanks everybody. Hope you have a great afternoon. I appreciate you. And thank you, Joel. Thank you, Mary
Thank you.
Grace.
All right.